Welcome to Myco Minute, conversations about collaboration brought to you by the capacity creators at Myco Consulting, LLC, where we help higher ed, nonprofit, and philanthropic leaders advance the initiatives they care about most.
Welcome back to Myco Minute. I'm Deb Mashek, and my guest today is Charlie Anastasi, who is the head of growth at Rize. And I'm really excited to have Charlie here because I guess it was just a week or so ago, I was reading an AAC&U bulletin about this consortium I hadn't heard of, which is called the Lower Cost Models for Independent Colleges Consortium. And it blew my mind because it makes this very bold claim that over the next 10 years, their goal is to reduce the cost of attending their member colleges by 30%. And my mind was blown, Charlie, by this. I thought, what are these folks doing? I want to reach out to them. So I reached out, learned a bit about LCMC, and then you agreed to come on the show, as it were. So thank you for being here.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I'm very excited to dive into it.
So let's do the dive. To me, the first big question is, what was the problem or is the problem that you all are looking to solve?
Yeah, so the first thing that's kind of in the name there, lower cost models for Independent Colleges Consortium, acronym very necessary for sort of such a mouthful like that. But the LCMC is trying to, as you stated, Deb, reduce the cost of higher education, reduce that tuition number by 30% over the next decade. And in order to get there, one of the other core elements of the mission is how can we think about, as mostly small private institutions, expanding enrollment in cost-efficient ways that allow us to deliver new types of academic programs to students so that as we grow our revenues, we actually are in a position to reduce tuition over time. And so if you think about, what are the problems behind that mission? I think the first thing is just, again, it's cost of attendance. When presidents and LCMC survey students as to why they can't attend, one of the number one reasons is cost. The number one reason students transfer is cost. And so we have to think about ways to deliver programs in a more cost-efficient way to students. And then the second problem that kind of sits behind that is that a lot of small private institutions are facing a challenging enrollment environment. There are changes in demographics that are often talked about in higher education, the demographic cliff that a lot of people talk about. And so in order for these colleges to reduce tuition, they really need to find ways to get on a more stable footing as it relates to their sort of financial sustainability. And so ultimately that main problem is, how do we reduce the cost of higher education? To get there, we also have to make sure that we're, shoring up the financial situation of a lot of these colleges.
Okay, so how do you reduce the cost of tuition? So obviously this is a tough nut to crack, and that everybody's trying to work on it. Everyone's concerned about these crazy growth rates and then reduction of government dollars. There are all these different drivers happening, but you all have a strategy. So talk us through it.
Yeah, absolutely. So to give you a little bit more of the background, so the Lower Cost Models Consortium was founded in 2015, and President Michael Alexander from LaSalle University was really the guiding beacon for the consortium. And he pulled together 18 other college presidents from across the country, all representing small privates. And when they got together, one of the ideas they had was online course sharing. And when you think about online course sharing, you often see it in the mindset of efficiencies. I have a class that runs at low enrollment. Maybe I can send my students to another campus. And so I'll gain efficiencies, they'll gain new students. And so we're kind of just like taking our existing courses and finding ways to mix and match seats in classrooms, which I think is a really valuable thing to do.
But and probably felt pretty novel in 2015.
Absolutely. Pre-pandemic, definitely novel. But the other thing they started to think about was, one of the challenges we have as small privates is, how do we expand into new areas that are cutting edge? Data analytics, computer science, healthcare administration, video game development. And those programs are really challenging to start because there's a lot of upfront cost, there's a lot of upfront time, and there's a lot of associated risk. a lot of new programs that are started don't end up driving the enrollment needed to actually keep that program sustainable. And so what these presidents said is, well, what if we shared courses not just in our existing slate of catalogs, but what if we leveraged each other to start new programs? So take supply chain management. I already have a lot of the business core that I need to start a concentration or a major in supply chain. If I could tap in to the supply chain courses from another member of the Lower Cost Models Consortium, then I could blend the courses on my campus with the courses on another campus and create this new pathway for students, which is not only great for them, but I can now recruit behind that new program. And if I can grow enrollment on the back of these new programs, then that is a way that I can continue to add cost-efficient sort of revenue to my campus and also expand pathways for my students. So it felt like this really amazing place where there was a win-win for the institution and the students. And I think the piece that we're missing, the link to get to, well, how does that relate to lower cost, is as we get these programs to be more of a portion of these colleges, because they're being offered across colleges in an online format, they're being delivered at 50% of the cost of a typical face-to-face program, which is not to say that face-to-face isn't critical. That's what a lot of students want when they go to these small privates. But how can we start to blend these modalities, create more hybrid forms of instruction so that we can lower the blended cost of instruction while actually expanding what we're doing?
Well, and I think, the other cost one is one that you mentioned where the upfront costs are tremendous to hire enough faculty power, for instance, to be able to launch a whole new major or a whole new program that you don't even know if the demand will be there to sustain that. And so, that growth mindset, well, I don't mean that in the Carol Dweck way, but that notion that the college itself can grow as opposed to working from this place of scarcity sounds very appealing.
I think that's exactly right. And one of the things that we've heard from a lot of presidents is, look, financial sustainability is this big, hairy thing that we deal with every year. But when you boil it down, I'm kind of faced with two options. I can either cut costs or I can grow revenues. And it feels like without a bunch of capital or a big endowment or the things that allow you to invest in growth, my only option is to cut costs. But if I can partner with others, if I can tap into the network so that I can start some of these programs without that typically required upfront investment, I actually can invest in growth. And I think that's been one of the most important things for the consortium, is that a lot of schools have felt like their hands are tied. Of course, we'd rather grow than cut, but I don't really see a lot of pathways to be able to invest into my future. And I think that's also been a really critical component of getting the collaboration to work. There is a lot of colleges that when they think about collaboration, it's new to them. This is the first time that they're thinking about allowing another campus to teach their students, or it's maybe the first time that they're allowing online courses onto their classroom. So what has allowed them to be willing to be a little vulnerable and kind of make some of those sacrifices? I think it's because there's this shared rallying cry of growth. That there is a way that we can kind of band together as small private institutions and start new programs and actually try to grow headcount rather than going the other way.
So I think this is probably a good place to talk about the different entities that are involved and the origin story. So we have Adrian College, we have Rize as an education platform. And then right now, I don't think we've mentioned this number yet, there are 95 colleges involved. Is that right? So yeah. What are these relationships like? Like, how would you characterize the relationships, but also the roles and responsibilities in making this fairly, it's a big undertaking. There are a lot of moving parts here. How those different entities make it go?
Great question. And so I kind of probably got a little bit sidetracked as I was going through some of the background in that first answer, but I was sort of mentioning you had the Lower Cost Models Consortium being one entity. Adrian College, President Jeff Docking, is on the executive committee of the Lower Cost Models Consortium. And as they were starting to pursue this model of online course sharing, one of the things that they noticed was administering the system was really hard. These 19 college presidents all have day jobs that happen to be pretty busy. They're running a college campus. And so to figure out ways to grow, types of programs that were being offered, or figure out software that could make the sharing of classes easier. Everyone wanted to be helpful, but no one had the time or focus to really commit to saying, I'll raise my hand. We're going to go develop the computer science curriculum, or my IT team can spare some time and help to build some software to help this really grow. And so President Docking had a really amazing idea, which was, what if I was able to recruit sort of a team to come to Adrian and incubate a company that would be the facilitator of this course sharing model. Effectively, they would provide the software that would help the colleges share the courses, share the data, and they would provide the people that would really do a lot of the coordinating amongst these members. And so he brought Rize Education, which is the company that I'm a part of, to Adrian College to work in a corner of the administration building, to learn from the people who were on Adrian's campus, to get direction from the steering committee members of the LCMC and other presidents. And so Rize became this for-profit company that partnered with this nonprofit group of colleges within the Lower Cost Models Consortium to really say, hey, let's take this amazing idea and let's turbocharge it. Let's bring in engineers who are going to build a system that allows us to share courses more seamlessly. Let's bring in a team that's going to source partnerships from leading academics to consult on these new programs, from corporations like Google to give us feedback on our computer science curriculum, and to make sure that we're providing each LCMC member a lot of help and support and helping them think about, well, how do I actually do this effectively? So to kind of like bring all the entities together, you've got the LCMC, which is the collection of 95 colleges. Adrian happens to be a little bit, I'll give him a shout out of being a special member that recruited the Rize team. And so Rize is the company that is partnering and sort of powering the Lower Cost Models Consortium.
And so it's really cool in terms of the public-private partnership emphasis that we're hearing more of in the higher ed literature as a way of bringing capacity to colleges, but also monetizing some of the existing services and whatnot that are already there. And then I just think about this incredibly innovative college president who's like, I know what we should do. We should go get a company. Really neat stuff. What about the autonomy piece? So I'm thinking about, I'm a former faculty member, that idea of like the faculty owns the curriculum. And so here there's this weird this company that's like organizing, like what kind of reactance or resistance pops up? And then how do you honor that? It's a very nuanced academic space where, there is this shared governance. So how do you navigate all of that?
Yeah, it's a great question, because every program that a college adopts through the Lower Cost Models Consortium runs through faculty governance. And so I think it's really important for us as we look to grow the number of programs that are being offered across the consortium, we have to get buy-in on that, shared governance side of things. And the way that we've really gone about it is, one, and you kind of touched on this with your question, really stressing what stays the same here. So we're doing a few things differently. We're pulling in curriculum from other colleges. You're going to be able to review that curriculum. You're going to be able to vote on it. But when we do this, let's work with you to build a program that's distinctly your own. So one of the examples that I like to give here, take video game development as an example, which is one of the programs that is offered through the consortium. Video game development has components of design, of being an artist, of storytelling, and of actual computer programming. So one college that we work with to sort of start video game development, they might have a fantastic art department. They have great animation courses, 3D design, and they also have an amazing creative fiction sort of like part of the institution. And so what we'll say to that college is, well, you're going to take some of the core building blocks of the major from this other college in the LCMC, but what can you weave in to make it distinctly your own? How can we make sure that this program stands out as something that weaves in some of the strong unique elements of your institution. And so I think what's been really important on the institutional autonomy side is not only that the faculty know that they have the final vote on these programs, but we're going to work with you to make them distinctly your institutions. This isn't just like a cookie cutter, every student or every college takes the same thing. There's a way for us to make sure that your unique value proposition is shining through in the ultimate program that's being put together.
So for me, the metaphor of a buffet is coming up, where I've already got my main dish, but I need to, I'm looking to round out this plate, and that I can actually go choose, and I'm not forced, as I understand it, like you're not forced to adopt any particular course. And you can actually say, no, our students will take the design class in person on campus, and it'll be complemented with maybe this coding piece over there. Is that right? So it really is very tailored.
Great analogy. And the thing it reminds me of is the typical program that we work on with an LCMC member, usually fewer than 25% of the credits are being delivered through the consortium. So it is, the vast majority are courses that are being taught in your existing modality, whether that's face-to-face or online at the home institution. And the other thing you referenced, which is really important, is when I say that the LCMC colleges, the teaching institutions deliver programs, these are just sequences of courses, right? But if you already teach something within that realm, you can kind of pick and choose an a la carte menu, to kind of take the food analogy a little bit forward here. You can pick and choose what works for your institution. And so I think there's that level of control and knowing that I can really guide my own destiny here. That's been a really important piece of getting buy-in to this model.
And then if, like, say an institution joins for a bit, they can, I'm guessing, get out. Are there like contracts, like you must be a part of this for the next 10 years, or how does, I guess this, maybe I should use this as a gateway to the broader kind of operational questions, like how does this actually work on the ground in terms of calendars and seat assignments and getting seats and the money and just all the operational pieces. What's it like?
Yeah, so I'll start with the question of, what is the commitment that an institution is making? And really the only commitment that they are making is, when they pass that program, hopefully they'll announce that to prospective students, to current students. But if 2-3 years down the line, they decide that they no longer want to offer that program, we would talk to them about a teach out. We would make sure that those students are served, but there would be no obligation for them moving forward. And I think that goes back a little bit to earlier when we were talking about, the risk associated with starting new programs. This is a much more flexible way of kind of testing the market, understanding how students are responding. And so I think that flexibility and reduction of risk is a really critical element of this. And so there isn't a long-term contract. To get into the operational pieces, so when you are coordinating across 95 institutions, one of the things that we thought about is, how do you create known friction? So what I mean by that is, in a lot of consortiums, the teaching institution, you'll just start on their calendar. But that could lead to a college that's taking classes across a variety of disciplines. Their registrar might need to track 5 different start dates, 5 different midterm grades due, 5 different finals weeks. And so what we said is, let's set a centralized calendar across the consortium, the same start and end date for every class. And what that does is creates friction, because it is rare that we are going to align perfectly with your calendar. But by setting something up front, we can sort of look around the corner and know where some of those challenges are going to be. Okay, there's some schools who are going to be 2 weeks sort of after our start date. What do we have to do to make sure that those students are not sort of behind the 8 ball when they get to class? Or if they are starting 2 weeks earlier than the centralized calendar, how do we make sure we nurture them during that 2-week lag so that they're really ready to hit the ground running when they get into the class later? And so a lot of the operations of this have been trying to create consistency across a large number of institutions, knowing that it's not going to make everyone perfectly happy, but knowing that it's at least a problem we can start to chip away at by defining it up front.
Yeah, I like that. The known collisions are like, we know this is going to be a challenge, but let's give you as much information as possible, as early as possible, so everyone can navigate it. And so then how do things like the enrollment work? I guess this is part of what the platform itself is probably doing. I mean, walk me through enrollment and then also the cost sharing aspect of it.
Yeah, great question. So on the enrollment side, what we work with the registrars on each of the colleges that are taking courses is they'll actually code these courses into their own catalog. So the way that the consortial model works is that if you are in a consortium with other regionally accredited institutions, and I'm glossing over some of the fine print here, but you can offer those courses on your campus for credit. And so the first step is that a student is actually going to see these courses in their course catalog just like anything else. Now, they'll be designated in a certain way so that a student knows that it's online or maybe through the consortium, but the student's experience is just normal here. They're going to pay full tuition to their institution. They're going to sign up through their catalog. The registrar then goes to this Rize database, this Rize platform, and uploads those students into the system so that we have a centralized log of who are all the students in each class, what college are they coming from, and what college is teaching those courses. And so that's really the place where that software was critical, because early on, that was 8 registrars just calling each other and saying like, hey, who's in this class? And am I sending them to you, or is that going to the other school? So that's really how that registration piece works. And then the college pays $350 per student per 3 credit course. And so to them, they're able to collect that tuition revenue from the student, and they're basically paying an adjunct in some ways you could think of it as for the instruction of that cost, or for that class, excuse me. And the split on the finance side is that money goes to the Rize platform, and then we compensate the teaching institution for the instruction of that class. And so what we've really tried to do is find a way to keep costs down on a per student basis. And we end up splitting that money between Rize to sort of continue to fund the operations of the consortium and the teaching institution.
Yeah, and so the institutions, and this gets to something you were talking earlier about, the presidents all have their day job too. They're able to bring on the capacity of Rize by bringing some of the money there. I mean, it makes a lot of sense. I'm also thinking about the data sharing. Are there a bunch of data sharing agreements that would have to be in place to get, sending student records to this entity? And
yes. So definitely in the world of higher education with FERPA, and I think cybersecurity and making sure that you're being a good steward of data is becoming a more and more, for good reason, important thing. There's stipulations in the memorandum of understanding to join the consortium, as well as a few other documents that kind of highlight, how data security is a priority.
Yeah. So I know the goal is to reduce tuition dollars, but there are so many other expenses on campus. I'm curious if this model has been or could be used to provide other students or other services. I'm thinking like mental health or academic support. And what thinking have you done on that, or kind of what are your intuitions about how this might generalize?
Yeah, it's a fantastic question. I think even just looking to other consortia across the country, I mean, so many amazing initiatives of how can we band together and provide greater services. To date, it hasn't been something that we've really done beyond the online course sharing piece. But I think we see a lot of opportunity in places like career services as an example. So I'll go back to that Google example that I mentioned earlier, just to put a little bit more depth behind that. So President Docking, the innovator that he is from Adrian, was on a plane with someone who worked at Google, and I'll save you all the details, but fast forward to he's in Mountain View trying to get them to, yes, he's trying to get them to help, endorse curriculum that he wants to teach on Adrian's campus. And part of the way that he got them to do that is he said, look, you might think of me as a small little 1,800 person campus in Adrian, but if you work with me on this, I know that I can get colleagues of mine and other sort of institutions to sort of also participate in this initiative. Because what companies like Google sometimes struggle with is it's really easy to show up to University of Michigan or Michigan State, where there are tens and tens of thousands of students, and kind of set up a recruiting pipeline there. It's really hard to set up relationships with each of the small privates across the country. And so one of the things that we're thinking about is, as you grow to 95 members, well, that's 170,000 students. We're almost bigger than some state systems at that point. can we use that scale to go to the Googles of the world, the Unity Technologies who work with us on our game development program, and say, hey, I know you wouldn't maybe partner with any one of these schools individually, but would you want to do a sort of career day, a webinar for students who are coming through the game development program, talk to them about what it's like to be in the gaming world? Hey, Google, can you provide a couple of young software engineers to talk about how they aced their interviews? And so I think that that's the next shared service that we're really thinking about, is how can we leverage this scale to provide career service opportunities that complement what's already on the campuses. But there's more layers to that. And I think it's right, so far it's been a matter of focus and making sure that we can really deliver on this first phase. But I do see a lot of potential to kind of, finding other ways to collaborate.
Well, and what's cool about even the career services example is, say that young Googler comes and talks about acing the interview, and that's recorded content that can become available to all the students, not just the ones in a particular program, but the idea of a virtual career center where people can come to hear those perspectives. That, like you said, not everyone's going to be someplace where those could be provided on the ground. What's been maybe the biggest challenge or the biggest surprise for you in doing this work? Like, what's been hard that you didn't think would be hard, or what's been easy that you didn't think would be easy?
That is a great question. I think what's been hard, or one of the biggest lessons learned, is early on, if you were to ask me what was going to be really hard about this, one of the things I would have said is getting 95 colleges to say, I want to be a part of what's going on. I'm willing to collaborate with 94 other institutions across the country. What's actually, I think, been more of the challenge, though, if you sort of think about that as inter-institution collaboration, has been figuring out how to make sure that there's communication and education on an intra-institution basis. So what I mean by that is, sometimes we'll have fantastic conversations with presidents, cabinets, and they're really excited about this idea of expanding programs. It's, there isn't much up front that I need to do. You're reducing risk. I've wanted to get into those areas. And so maybe it does make sense that we've seen a lot of growth. It's a very low risk situation that sort of helps colleges. But the challenge has been even when you get that sort of top level excitement, in order for a new program to be successful at a college, your academic advisors need to know what's going on. They need to be able to coach students. Your marketing and enrollment team needs to have the messaging down on why this is an exciting field for students. The faculty need to sign off in the shared governance structure. And so I think for a while, we almost like paralyzed each of the pockets of the institution, where I would work with the academic administration team to get it through governance. And then I would talk to the registrar's office about how they were going to get students into classes. And then I would go to the marketing team and talk about how are you going to get the word out. And I think a lot of what we realized is, like, this needs to be more collaborative from day one. If the registrar feels like I wasn't a part of those conversations and you're now adding work to my plate, why did no one ask me about this? If the marketing team says, well, why'd you choose this program? All the applications of interest I'm seeing say we should be doing digital marketing, not this program. So I think that's been the hard piece of this, is to be successful. It's not just getting someone to say yes, or a shared governance model to say, yes, we approve this into the curriculum. It's really figuring out, how do we make this work for the whole institution? And how do we make sure that their needs are being addressed and that everyone is on the same page? And that takes a lot of work.
And I'm smiling because in my, the way that I work in facilitating collaborative action, this idea of the skilled partners from these cross-functional areas coming together as the implementation and working group. I agree, it's so hard, in part because people are speaking different languages and have different priorities, but that's exactly why having everybody around the table together ends up being so dang fruitful, because you figure out where the hiccups are going to be, and there's shared ownership too, as opposed to, like you said, with the registrar having something imposed on you, especially when everybody's plates are, there's my food metaphor again, but when plates are already so dang full, to say, oh, here, let's bolt this onto everything else you're doing. It's totally understandable that you can get reactance, but it sounds like you've all figured out a way to move that gracefully.
I would say getting better. Always room for improvement, but definitely a learning early on that I think we're starting to improve upon.
And then what about, I mean, we mentioned COVID ever so slightly. I'm curious how receptivity or attitudes toward this model might have changed from pre-COVID. I wish we could say post, but let's just say from pre-COVID to now.
Great question. So the main thing that comes to mind is a lot of colleges were, so Adrian is an example. Adrian had never really done online learning in any scale. And then literally over one weekend, they were a fully online college. And so the first thing I think it did was it opened up our minds a little bit to the fact that this modality may be something that could have staying power. And one of the things that we've been looking at recently in surveying students is I was looking at something from Inside Higher Ed just a couple of weeks ago, and it was maybe getting the exact number off, but 70-ish% of students either said they somewhat or strongly agree that they want to have some form of online learning in their classes going forward. And the other weird sort of stat to me on that is that other students, when you look at surveys, only like 10% of students have said like, I've been thrilled with the online learning that's been provided. So it's been this interesting time where a lot of people have been forced into, accepting online learning. There's clearly been wide dispersion in the quality of that online learning. Some have been good enough that students are saying, I want more of that. Others have been bad enough where students are like, please, I'm done. Get me back into sort of the face-to-face classroom. But I think the biggest thing that's done for us is it's created an acceptance and a familiarity. And I think the other thing it's allowed us to do is show people that there are really good online experiences that you can create. And so when you look at the dispersion, if we can sort of help show that by using the Rize team to help our instructors set things up in the LMS and embed consistent learning design principles in some of these classes, like we're going to use the flipped classroom model, and active learning is really important, and project-based learning and capstones that sort of allow students to experience the curriculum is really important. I think what that's allowed us to done is just, some people who would have been closed off to this idea just a year ago are willing to at least listen because they've experienced it themselves. So I think it's probably overall been a benefit. The other side of that coin is, oh my gosh, have these colleges have to wear a lot of hats this year. And so a lot of colleges said, this sounds interesting, but I'm like dual functioning as a college and sort of like trying to masquerade as a public health institution right now. And so I did get the sense that especially heading into sort of this month, people were fried. They were a little bit burnt out. And so I think it opened doors. It also got some people to say, hey, there's only so many strategic priorities that you can have in a given year, and COVID is priority right now.
Yeah. And it does sound though like you all were able to kind of, what's working and what's not working, and you'll be able to continue to innovate around that. So I'm just really excited to learn about this model. And if others would like to learn more, where should they go and how can they connect with you?
Great question. So the main place to go would be thelcmc.org. But if you'd like to connect with me, I love having conversations like this. And so I am at C Anastasi, ANASTASI, at adrian.edu.
Okay. And I will put that in the show notes so people can reach out. So Charlie, thank you so much for joining me for this conversation. And I love learning more about what y'all are up to. And for those who are interested in learning what Myco's been up to, feel free to swing by the website. I put up some case studies of some recent clients there so you can kind of get a better sense of what I've been doing with my time as well. So Charlie, thanks.
Deb, thank you so much.